Welcome, everybody. Welcome to tonight's council meeting for, always forget what day it is, February 9th, 2023. This time, I'd like to call the meeting to order and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Anybody ready? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do I hear adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, thank you. Passes unanimously. Tom, thanks for welcoming us. Deputy Mayor is on screen with us tonight. Thanks, Tom. At this time, we will do a proclamation. I've asked Councilmember Fairtami to read this for me. Thank you, Councilmember.
Appreciate the honor, Mr. Mayor, and it's a fairly long one, so please settle in. Whereas on February 19th, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which authorized the United States military to forcibly remove and incarcerate more than 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast, including 12,000 Japanese American residents of Washington State. And whereas the first civilian evacuation order gave Japanese Americans from Bainbridge Island less than 1 week to leave their homes, personal belongings, farms, businesses, friends, and family, and report to hastily constructed detention centers like Camp Harmony on the grounds of the Washington State Fair in Puyallup. And whereas this drastic course of action allegedly aimed to prevent acts of espionage and sabotage by Japanese Americans who were deemed untrustworthy and disloyal to the United States. And whereas on March 23rd, 1943, the War Department organized a segregated unit of Japanese Americans, many of whom reported for military duty from the concentration camps surrounded by barbed wire in which they and their families were detained. And whereas more than 12,000 volunteers responded to questions about their loyalty and patriotism by amassing a battle record unparalleled in the United States military history with a casualty rate of 314% and earning a collective 7 presidential unit citations, 21 medals of honor, 29 distinguished service crosses, 1 distinguished service medal, 588 silver stars, more than 4,000 bronze stars, 22 Legion of Merit medals, 145 soldiers medals, 9,486 Purple Hearts, 1 decoration from France and Italy, and in 2010, the Congressional Gold Medal. And whereas in 1982, the Congressional Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians found no military or security reason for the internment of persons of Japanese ancestry, but determined the cause of the incarceration as racial prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. And whereas through this travesty of justice, Japanese Americans suffered immense economic loss of property and assets, immeasurable physical and psychological harm, and were deprived of their constitutional liberties without due process of law. And whereas in 1979, Washington State Congressman Mike Lowry introduced H.R. 5977 to provide reparations and an apology to the Japanese American incarcerees, thus initiating a 10-year legislative quest that ended when President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. And whereas throughout Washington State, the last remaining survivors of the European and Asian Pacific battlefields of World War II and of American incarceration camps lived their golden years in quiet contrast to their extraordinary acts of conscience and valor, while all of America continues to benefit from their heroic patriotism. And whereas though there were no Japanese or Japanese Americans in Lake Forest Park development due to restrictive racial covenants, there were several families of Japanese descent within the current Lake Forest Park city limits who were relocated. Now, therefore, the mayor and the city council of the city of Lake Forest Park pause to acknowledge the anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066 to recognize and remember Japanese American veterans, incarcerees, and civil rights activists from the state of Washington, and to honor the lessons and blessings of liberty and justice for all, and to proclaim February 19th, 2023 as the Day of Remembrance in the city of Lake Forest Park, and we urge all citizens to join us in this special observance.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. Okay, with that, move on to citizens' comments. Do we have any, Chief? Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. Thank you, sir. First up, David Newman. Welcome, David. Yes, sir. There should be a button to turn on for you. Yep. There you go. Thank you, sir.
My name is David Newman. I live at 16440 38th Avenue here in Lake Forest Park. I continue to support reliable, low-cost, wide-reaching public transit. However, today I stand here to voice my opposition to this ill-conceived, costly, and environmentally destructive high-speed bus project, which will do little to further these aims and cause harm to the region, irreparable harm to the region. How a project of this magnitude, which literally appeared on my neighborhood's radar out of nowhere last summer, got approved is a matter for another time. What is important now is that we stop its implementation as it is currently being pushed forward. As others have stated eloquently, it will be very costly, will destroy hundreds of trees and shrubs, and will cause incalculable hardship, noise, and travel delays to thousands of local residents and commuters every day for years during the construction phase. And all for what? No reduction in traffic congestion, and an insignificant estimate of travel time reduction for the near zero number of people who ride the bus. We hear that Sound Transit's own estimate is 2 minutes saved for a bus rider. And what will we be left with? Far more noise, no trees, just an ugly graffiti-covered wall, perhaps, a football field-sized bus stop at 165th Street that only a handful of people will ever use, a fleet of modern electric buses, each carrying tons of lithium-ion batteries, 90% of which are manufactured in Asia, and which will require regular replacement, thus saddling the citizenry with unknowable future costs that were clearly never considered as part of the cost-benefit analysis. And a median barrier that will prevent northbound Sheridan area residents from turning left onto 38th or 39th Avenue, forcing them to go to 165th and wait perhaps several cycles of the light before they can turn left. And nearly empty buses sitting next to backed up traffic because it all slams to a halt just a short distance down the road because it all constricts at 145th Street. Yes, there will be improvements to the drainage, which is not an insignificant issue. And yes, I suppose the crosswalk at 165th will get improved. But the overall scale and impact is out of line to justify these benefits. And if you polled the residents, you'd find little support for this ill-conceived project. In summary, as a resident of Lake Forest Park, I request each of my elected representatives to go on the record stating either their opposition or support for this project. We voted you in. We deserve to know where you stand. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bud Housey, do I have the right ones? Wait, last name. Thank you, sir.
My name is Bud Holmesy. I live at 16255 38th Avenue Northeast, Lake Forest Park. I'd like to make a few comments about the Sound Transit project. A lot of it is very well known to all of you. It's a catastrophe that's going to hit our small, precious town. And there are three parts to the catastrophe. The first is the taxpayer catastrophe. This is incredibly expensive for a very short stretch, which will add one bus lane, one eastbound bus lane to the current situation. It's a catastrophe for our urban forest. It will decimate, it will deforest parts of Lake Forest Park. And lastly, it's a catastrophe. It's a human catastrophe for the people whose properties are being taken, which will move traffic, which has been measured at 90 decibels when those big trucks go up that hill. It will move that traffic and that noise and that pollution 10 feet, 12 feet closer to their backyards. It will take their front yards. It will, in many cases, ruin people's lives. You all know this. So why am I standing here? I'm standing here to, I guess it's a plea for help. There must be some avenue by which you can use the power of government to scale this thing down to a reasonable cost, a reasonable protection of our urban forest, and a reasonable protection of the wealth and the well-being of our citizens. I don't know what that is. Sound Transit sends people who say they're going to listen. They don't really listen. The board has proven to be absolutely tone deaf with regard to the needs of Lake Forest Park as a city. There must be something, I don't know what it might be, but there has to be some legal action that might be taken to try to get this down to a reasonable scale of a project. The irony is that tomorrow, my neighbor and I are going to take out a very large heritage tree that's on our property line that's now dead at the cost of around $6,000. We have filled every form, crossed every T, dotted every I, yet Sound Transit is going to take hundreds of heritage trees, 6-inch in diameter and larger. It just seems to be a travesty and a catastrophe, and I hope that you can find some way to do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bud. Vicky Scurry.
Hi, Vicky Scurry, Lake Forest Park resident, and here, I agree with a lot of what I heard tonight, and I actually didn't prompt these guys to say that. So what I'm going to say though is I did a wall review. I read your ordinance, and I think it looks good with one minor thing that really stood out to me. The review process. Right now, everything goes through the Public Works Department. And one of the things I can say with my experience in the field of transportation is that you really need an interdisciplinary team in order to create a good project. So having the aesthetics for the wall, which is the patterning or the textures or whatever, the relief, and the landscape, both in the jurisdiction of the Public Works Director solely, seems like a giant mistake to me. It's like letting the engineering department do the drawings for the art or aesthetics and the landscape design. So I would recommend that there's a committee that's formed in order to take care of that. In other words, either from the city council or appointed from the mayor by a group of citizens who are interested in architecture and art and landscape, but actually having a small design commission that especially comes in for special projects like the city gateway, because that's what we're doing here. So I did send this markups to you, and I you should have them by now, but I also sent you some more pictures of different projects from around the region. And one that I think is worth looking at is one by Peggy Gaynor, because it's out in I-90 and it's a pretty inexpensive project, but it's really effective. It's an MSD wall, but you can sort of see how you can do a lot with a little if you have the right person with the right vision. And then I also sent a wall that's over in Newport Way. And the reason I picked that one is because I think it has a small profile in terms of construction. It's built with basically columns, cast in place columns, and it's called a slot wall. So they basically don't have to dig through the entire yard of the neighbors, and they just put in these with their crane, they put in your big 10 by 20-foot tall precast panel that has pattern on it. And it's an very efficient way to build these walls. And the other thing is the form liners, you don't have to buy as many because you're not casting in place where you need a liner for every piece of wall that you're touching, right? So I put that in for an economic look. And then I also thought the idea that you mentioned last time about having the green walls be another part of the wall system. I think that's really a good idea. It may or may not work for this particular entrance because of the spatial configurations, but it could work somewhere. In my experience with green walls, that they always save money. I've saved $1 million twice by using green walls, and they work in the aesthetic of the site. And then that's the main thing. If you're working in a site that's primarily, recreational, you don't really want a concrete wall. You want something that's more forgiving than that and more like the natural environment that it's from, its context. So I would say, please read these. I also brought a pattern book, and I'll order one for you, or I could leave this one and I'll order another one for myself. And thank you very much. Maybe I'll give this to the mayor to look at, because this is the best of the what do they call the open market, okay? Generics.
Thank you,
Okay, thank
Vicky.
you.
Thank you. Anybody out here like to speak? Okay, do we have anybody on Zoom?
If you want to address the council, please use the raise hand function. Doesn't look like it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, seeing nobody on Zoom and nobody else out here, I will close citizens' comment at this time. Thank you. Okay, folks, from there, we are going to the consent calendar.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
before we move to the moving this consent calendar, there is a scrivener's error that needs to be corrected in the meeting minutes. Minor, but I just wanted to bring it up. And that is, let's see, where are we here? It says staff present virtually as opposed to staff present. That everyone there listed was present, I believe, at that meeting.
Okay, everybody agree with that?
Remember? We can find out.
That's good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Everybody agrees with that? Would anybody like to move the consent calendar?
So moved.
As amended.
It's been moved in a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, passage unanimously. Thank you, council. With that, we're gonna do the final confirmation. Corey, could you bring your guest up here with you? Corey has quite a long speech she wants to give us all tonight. She loves that. So,
Hello, so tonight I have Joshua Rosenau, hopefully a future park board member. Mayor and I interviewed him the other week and we thought he will bring some good views and ideas to the park board.
welcome, Josh. We'll start this out with, it's last time I saw you had the mask on the whole time, and so now I know what you look like, and that's
Not a
nice.
social distancing here.
Yes,
Okay.
this is great. So with that, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you want to be on the Parks Board, and we'll go from there.
So I live on at 20033 33rd Avenue, just up sort of Turtle Rock, almost to Mount Lake Terrace. I've got two kids in elementary school at LFP Elementary, 7 and 10. And so we spent a lot of time at parks. And I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about parks. My background is as a biologist, and I work for the Mountain Lion Foundation now and previously for the National Center for Science Education. So I've got a background in that sort of connects to it, but most of my interest is being in the community now. We moved in 6 years ago, and having kids who and you know, a real appreciation for the parks and the outdoors, and wanting to be part of what's going on in town here.
Yep.
That's the short version.
Okay, council, any questions? Yes,
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Bodie.
Hello, Josh, and thank you for volunteering. I'm the council liaison to the Parks and Recreation Board, and we definitely have our work cut out for us in the year coming up. As a member of the Parks and Recreation Board, you would both be representing the community to the city, but also reaching out to the community. So would you talk a little bit about how you might be able to wear both those hats?
Sure. So for the last, well, since my older child was in kindergarten, I've been part of the Lake Forest Park PTA, and right now I'm the advocacy chair, and before that communications chair. So I've got some good connections to the community that way. My parents-in-law also live in Lake Forest Park, as does my sister-in-law, and they have a kid who's the same age. So the Rosenau Berliner family compound is growing and expanding through the town. So yeah, I've got a lot of connections. I actually Alice Peterson, who's on the board, was in the same preschool, and now her kids go to a different school. But yeah, through all of that, you know, a lot of connections out and opportunities to talk to people about how kids are using the parks, how adults are using the parks, and to be able to convey that back to the city.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
With your science background, I'd be really interested to hear your opinion on play as education, and like how would you bring those concepts to the Parks Board and to recommendations to the council, and bringing that science background to bear?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about, there's a lot of work that's being done on, outdoor play and the importance of nature as an educational tool. And, as my background in field biology is definitely came out of that sort of outdoor experience. And so giving people a way to just a week ago, I was out or a little bit more out on the Olympic Peninsula with some mountain lion researchers who are trackers. And a lot of what they were talking about is of how you sort of find where a mountain lion kill is out in the woods. is learning how to read the landscape. And same thing that when I would do trips through the Grand Canyon and sort of looking at the rocks and figuring out how the world around you is telling you the story of what's been happening there. And I think that there's a lot of interpretive opportunity and also sort of activity opportunity to explore that, whether it's doing bird walks or having signage or other things, just to sort of bring that the natural history and the human history into the parks.
I'd love to see your take on how 5 Acre Woods would develop. I think there's a lot of those concepts
Yeah.
that are already budding in that design. And I just want to say kudos, 2 kids, lots of family connections. You're probably very, very busy, and I appreciate you submitting an application and wanting to do your civic duty here. I really appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
Councilmember Farahani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Rosenau, for volunteering. It's great to see people getting involved in our community. My question for you is and feel free not to answer this, were there any particular things you wanted to work on about the parks? You addressed Councilmember Riddle's question about the play education as play kind of thing, but were there other motivations you had, something you wanted to see happen?
I probably started thinking about it when the recent proposition was on the ballot and the conversations about the new lakefront park, and hadn't really fully realized all of the ways that I could be involved in that through the Parks Board, that there was a formal process there and learning about that and seeing those opportunities. So knowing that park is, and I know when I got to meet with the mayor about this, the possibilities of that development were certainly a big part of that conversation and certainly on my mind when I was applying, but that not the only reason. Would probably would have done it anyway.
Thank you. Councilmember Cassover.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Rosenau, thank you so much for being willing to spend some of your time thinking about the future of the city. We have, as well as the human residents of the city, we also have a lot of non-human residents of the city. We have really quite an extraordinary amount of wildlife here, and our parks and open spaces, of course, play a very important role in their lives. And I just kind of wondered what as a biologist, what your thoughts are about that. I know I live quite close to the well field, just a little ways up the hill up here, and we have deer and we have bobcats and we have coyotes and a ton of birds, and I'm very interested in making sure that their future is also secured in Lake Forest Park. And I just wondered what your thoughts are about the Parks Board and its role there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have like strong opinions about necessarily what that would look like, but certainly, I've been working now. I now work at the Mountain Lion Foundation and previously at Wild Fish Conservancy. So salmon conservation and the land-based conservation also have certainly been on my mind a lot over the last few years in Washington. So it's a topic that I would be thinking about and making sure that we're providing that buffer space, that we're providing room for the non-human residents here as well. I don't know. I don't know right now what the issues are and how that would play out in practice, but yeah, as it's certainly something that's always on my mind. And finding ways to connect people again with that and understand what's going on around. Last fall, there was someone saw a mountain lion in their backyard, and I think I wrote to the police and said, hey, we've got a Mountain Lion Foundation person here. If you get any calls, if people are freaked out, and no one, they were like, yeah, no one cares. Fine, we're used to it. So it's not, there are not the same sorts of problems that come up in some communities where there really are wildlife conflicts that can come up to that same degree. I think Lake Forest Park is a little bit more oriented towards trying to be friendly towards wildlife. And, I'm sure there are always more that we can do and can think about, especially in the parks.
Thank you.
Any other questions, council? Tom?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Rosenau, for the work you do with the foundation, as well as being willing to volunteer. I know in your world, the West Coast had a big loss with the loss of P22 a couple of weeks ago. That was something that I have family in Los Angeles, and several of them have encountered that individual, and quite a character. And I think it's this discussion in the comments about interacting with wildlife is is a great thing for us to continue as a community. And I really appreciate the fact that your background as a biologist, as well as having small children, can really contribute to the, education as play or play as education, depending on how you look at it. And also helping find the balance in our parks with, interacting with wildlife in a great environment. What is your favorite park or open space in Lake Forest Park?
A good question. I guess I'm thinking right now about a time when we did a field trip in my fifth graders class to Animal Acres, and they were doing a stream ecology project. So they had someone who came in and they were wading around in the stream and looking for invertebrates and just exploring all of those sort of hidden things in the waterways along there. But also times up at the doing the salmon release at is it McAleer? I think up there, yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's really beautiful, and being able to see the beaver dam there and sort of see how the landscape gets shaped by the animals around us.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for your willingness to serve, and I know we'll all be excited to see how you can contribute from this perspective of both a biologist, but also a father, because of two small children. We've been trying to, as policymakers, find additional ways for our young people to have more active opportunities out there in our city resources, as well as create new ones. So thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, with
Yes.
that, I'd like to move the appointment of Joshua Rosenau to the Parks and Recreation Board, position 6.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other? Seeing none, all those in favor of Josh Rosenau for position 6, please say aye.
Hi.
Any nays? Pass unanimously.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Real quick, when we interviewed him, Joshua, the other day, I was catching on to everything, he's into the fish and I love the creeks. And my favorite though is I asked where he lived and he said he lived by Turtle Rock. And I said, awesome. Somebody who knows where Turtle Rock is. 'Cause that was, and to be honest, 52 years ago, I used to fish not too far from Turtle Rock, but I'm really happy you're going to be here. I like that you're, to be honest, we need more people from that end of town. I'm very, very happy about that. And yeah, like I said to you when I was interviewing, this is a great time because we have something very exciting going to happen. And you came on right in time and we need people like you. So thank you very much. We'll be hearing from you again. So thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
With that, council, I'd like to bring something up real quick, and since we're talking about this. Right now, because of all the reaching out we've done, we've actually got some people applying to be on our boards and commissions. I got quite a few for the Plan Commission, and we actually got a couple more for the Parks Board. I would like to change our rules, and I would like to add alternates to our boards. Because right now I have people that want to be on them, let's grab them. An alternate would be a voting member, but only when the other people weren't there. And then, it'd be putting more people there, but that way if somebody has to leave, which we see happen all the time, there'll be somebody already there. So if we could rewrite, I think that'd be in our governance manual probably, but I'd like to look into that because when we have a chance to get good people, and the two other people I have that have applied for the Parks Board are really impressive too. So yes.
Mr. Mayor, I would support that because I do notice and I'm aware that there are people who are currently on, say, the Planning Commission who are planning to sometime in the next few months step down, even though their term hasn't expired. And similarly, on the Parks and Recreation Board, we've had a couple of people step off when their life situations have changed without very much notice. So that seems like, given all the important work we have on the comprehensive plan with the Planning Commission and the master plan for the parks with the Parks and Recreation Board, that makes sense to me. So we have continuity.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, I'm also in supportive from a pragmatic reason. The tree board is struggling to maintain quorum from month to month. And so having an alternate would just be, a little bit of a cushion,
Yeah.
assuming we can get the tree board fully staffed.
think that'd be a great deal. And plus, what we're talking about, we do need a high school member for the Parks Board. So if
Mhm.
anybody knows anybody. And good news is, I do believe I have 8 interviews for the Planning Commission coming up.
Wow.
Yeah, that
Wow,
one, we got
wow.
quite a few. So I guess all that, getting that out on our newsletter and stuff really did help. So try to work that out. Deputy Mayor, let's see if we can get that through and try to get this moving on. So I'm looking forward to that. And thank you guys for entertaining my idea. And with that, we will move on to council discussion and action, King County Regional Homeless Authority. It's City Administrator Hill.
Can't even push the right button, so bear with me. This is not for action tonight. This is for discussion and any feedback you would like to give me tonight to take back to Alexis at the King County Regional Homeless Authority. But you remember back on December 8th, you approved the agreement for homeless services with the agency with the caveat that we bring back a memorandum of understanding between the agency and the city of how the dollars were to be spent. Attached as an exhibit to the MOU is a memo from them outlining 4 options for funding with their own recommendation of where they'd like to see the funding go. I've drafted it such that you could put 1 or 2 in there or 3, whatever, up to you. Just for the audience, they are recommending that the dollars from Lake Forest Park be put towards severe weather response. So those are the winter shelters. They stand up when the temperatures drop, et cetera. You know, there's very good uses in here of the money, you know, the homeless outreach, the Mary's Place, et cetera. And so I just want to get your feedback tonight, let you mull it over the next couple of weeks. The plan would be to bring it on the 23rd. I also want to ask if you would like Alexis to participate in that meeting. She's unavailable tonight. Let's see if we can get her here as well. If you have any questions that you would like answered, or if you just simply want to make a decision on how the money will be allocated. So I stand for discussion.
Council. Yes. Councilman Cassover.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Well, this is very sort of timely with another communication that I've been part of from NUSA. And so NUSA has just sent and this is really for the council's kind of information, because I think it dovetails very nicely with some of the other things we're talking about here. So NUSA has sent a letter to the King County Regional Homeless Authority, and they have some requests also for the funding in this end of the county. The Oaks is number 1. And sub-regional support is another, because there is currently not a sub-regional coordinator for North King County. The emergency shelter is the 3rd one. And that I think is a very important, you know, the severe weather shelter. That has been something that NUSA has helped organize. It's used volunteers, it's at a church, but what is happening now is that there are folks with more severe mental health needs than volunteers can really manage. And so it's really urgent and important that we get some trained professionals to also participate in that severe weather shelter and that emergency shelter. So I just thought that would be a good piece of information for council, that other the folks who are actually responsible for caring for the people in the North End, these are their priorities.
Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention a very similar thing, that the current severe weather shelter is facing those challenges, and they're not able to adequately support the needs of those who are coming in their doors. Just the volunteers just don't have they're not trained mental health professionals. So definitely a strong need there. And I think being part of that is important for us. So I would support having that as one of our funding. I think the children and youth and young adults is another area that's upfront in KCRH's 5-year plan. So that dovetails well with their intent, and I think that's a place where we can probably make a lot of impact. The others are useful. I just am thinking about our community and things that more directly kind of impact our community. Those are the two kind of that are my top ideas, just to start the conversation.
Yes, Councilmember Bodie.
Mr. Mayor, just briefly, I agree with Councilmember Riddle. Those would be my top 2 priorities as well.
Yes, Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, I'll agree with my colleagues. They seem to be good, and the recommendation from the authority itself. I think what might help for me would be a bit more context as to what we get, or in that we will be contributing roughly $16,000 each year. And so just knowing what does $16,000 annually get us in terms of extreme weather shelter, what would $16,000 a year get us for children and youth services? But I do think those seem like the 2 best options.
Okay. Yes, Councilmember Lebo.
I think all of the suggestions and recommendations are all worthy. I don't think any of us would say, I don't think we should give money to any of these. I think we'd all say, I wish we could give more money to them. I do think, though, that as the amount of money that we're giving is not a large amount of money in consideration for what the organization is needing and is spending, I would be in favor of following their recommendation for severe weather. And the reason for that is that they've looked at the funding that they have and the resources they have, and I would follow their judgment. I'm always supportive of all the others. I mean, children and families is an easy, very easy one to support. Severe weather is not as how do I say it? It's not one that just immediately pulls at the heartstrings as family and children do. But as an organization, they've come to us and said, we think that's the best place to spend your money. And I would support that.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councilmember Firthani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Administrator Hill, for your presentation. I think I'm hoping my fellow council members can help me out here, but there's a reference made in to the summer 2021 heat event that there was a cooling canopy set up. Was it set up in the city? Or was it the one in Shoreline?
No, I think it's Shoreline.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. So we need to decide which way we're gonna go
Not
and
tonight.
then let you know.
We'll bring this back on the 23rd. I'm hearing a leaning towards the severe weather, but for Councilmember Goldman, I will get that just so that you have an understanding, because it's always nice to understand what is the incremental lift that the dollars are giving. So we'll have them answer that for both of those items, but drafted with severe weather in mind.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes,
may I
Councilmember Bill.
Thank you. We did get at the North King County Coalition on Homelessness, we did get a report out from Alexis, and I think it'd be great to have her come back and kind of provide some more information like she did to our group around the 5-year plan. And one of the aspects is that they're looking at what should be standardized across the county. Things like when you enact criteria for opening or the severe weather shelters. So it's the same everywhere, so that way there's knowledge of when they will open, because each city has their own criteria. But also which parts of the plan should be tailored to their subregion. And there's a recognition that there are some areas that aren't one size fits all. So they've created a list and are working through with the sub-regional areas to say, which ones do you think you should have more control over for your area? So I think having her come in and describe that to us, I think it's also kind of helping us with our comfort level of where do we have a say in it over where it's standardized. So definitely, I think she needs to come in.
Yeah, and I'll see if hopefully she's available the 23rd. If not, you know, as soon after as possible. We'll get her back here.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, council. With that, we'll move on to council member reports. Do I see any council member reports?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember Bodie.
I would like to report on two meetings I attended, the Planning Commission and the Sound Cities Policy Issues Committee. The Planning Commission met this week and they elected a new chair and vice chair. They elected Madeline Larson as chair, continuing, but her term can only extend through June. So there'll have to be a transition at that point. And the vice chair is one of our newer Planning Commission representatives, Ashton McCartney. So that is, you know, a nice development for us. And they are going to be hitting the ground running, working on the planning ahead for the comprehensive plan development. We also had a farewell to Ira Gross, who has served on the Planning Commission for a very long time and been a very valuable member. So it was kind of a sad moment to say goodbye, but he came in person so we could all hug at this point, which is a surprise. They're looking at a schedule for starting more intensive development of the comprehensive plan starting in June. And just so everyone knows, the current comprehensive plan isn't a bad document by any means. So they will be trying to target the places where either under state law or by, you know, changing values and policies, they want to make changes, but it isn't going to be a wholesale throw the document out and rewrite it and start from scratch. So that makes it very doable, I think. The Sound Cities Policy Issue Committee, bear with me. There was a legislative update from the Association of Washington Cities. First of all, they mentioned the revised vehicle pursuit. These are the issues they're following and paying the most attention to. And the updating that so that the reasonable suspicion is the standard. And Chief, you probably know about this. Second, the Blake response. They're looking at supporting bills that would make small amounts of drug possession gross misdemeanor with a diversion program, but accountability. So if you didn't go through your treatment and diversion program successfully, there would be some consequences. They also indicated there are some bills they're following that actually they are very are overbroad in terms of city liability. And so they're looking at that from a financial point of view. The critical infrastructure changes that we've been following and the Public Works Revolving Fund is very high priority for them. They have 11 pages of housing legislation that's proposed, tracking those bills. The one thing I wanted to mention, because we've talked about some of them, is this provision I hadn't heard about before, where if a small city touches a larger city geographically, then the density of the larger city applies to the smaller city. So as a city that touches both Shoreline and Seattle, that was a concern for me on how that would be interpreted. They also are trying to get less broad preemption of local zoning requirements, including environmental provisions and parking restrictions. And there was frustration mentioned by several city representatives at the lack of real affordability measures. And that just saying we're going to rely on market forces and the usual formulas and incentives is not going to do anything. And housing land trusts were mentioned as one of the pragmatic ways that you can provide more affordable housing. But it was really the frustration that was expressed was we talk so much about affordable and workers wages, affordable housing, and yet it's mostly still at the state level talk. So the Regional Housing Authority came up. There's still a lot of controversy about the 5-year plan. I was surprised. People think it's vague. They think there's too much on permanent housing in it, where the Regional Homelessness Authority is supposed to focus on emergency and transitional housing. And there was a lot of sentiment, I think, from 3 cities that tiny houses were not being given consideration, and that they felt that that was a very successful program in their jurisdictions, and they really were puzzled why they were being excluded from the program. I think that's it. Yep, that's it. But it was a busy agenda, a lot of attendance, and there's going to be an in-person meeting, Tom, perhaps in April. That's it for me.
Thank you, Councilmember, for attending my stead. I really appreciate it. My voice was gone and I was exhausted, so I do appreciate it.
And if I could just add to that too, I did
you were there.
present
Yes.
to the PIC, with my first time doing that, but and it's something that we as a city also will need to pay some very close attention to coming up here. The structure of how we fund solid waste disposal in King County is changing because fewer tons of garbage are being put in the landfill, and currently the way the rates are structured is it's all about the number of tons that you deposit there. And because recycling is growing, the entire business model for the solid waste division has to change too. So there is a proposal now which the King County Council has approved, which we all will need to adjust our contracts with our haulers to figure out these new rates, which are going to be kind of fixed fees for each city that vary according to what proportion of solid waste of tons this city provides against the whole. So the administration is aware of this, and we haven't heard from our trash hauler yet, but I think we need to probably take the initiative and reach out to them and get working on this. We also do have our own consultant who helped us negotiate our contract in the past, and I know that they are having to renegotiate contracts all across the county, so they'll be well up on what is going on. And so this matter will come to us as a council once that negotiation has occurred, and we will have to approve the new rates. And that has to occur before the end of this year. And I know it's only February, but these things take time. So we do need to get to work on it. But that was the presentation that I made to the PIC. It's been a topic of discussion at the solid waste for months and months and months. And we had several different models to look at of how to do the rate structure. And, we fixed on this one, and the King County Council now approved it. So now we've got to really move ahead. So anyway, that was my presentation to them. And I might as well go on and just tell you about a couple of meetings that I've been at. Other than that, let me see here. Growth Management Policy Board, they also are following all of those housing bills at the state legislature. The PSRC tends to not actually weigh in on one side or another on these bills. What they do tend to do, though, is to analyze them and to present to the legislature what they believe the impacts of some of their bills will be. So that is a valuable role that they play. I think there are some people in the region who would rather that PSRC become a little bit more sort of active in promoting certain kinds of legislation, but I don't see that happening quite yet. So we had that presentation, and then the Growth Management Policy Board has also put together a big report, which they've called a housing typology. It's the regional housing strategy, and they've built a actions and tools, and it's a housing place typology, and there's a whole map And I looked to see where Lake Forest Park is in this. And of course, they classify us as a place that has a high opportunity for more growth. And it's got a lower displacement risk. That is a great concern in a lot of areas of the county, that as new housing gets built, it actually displaces affordable housing, and in its place builds less affordable housing. They don't see that as a risk in Lake Forest Park, but they do see Lake Forest Park as a place where more housing could be managed. So anyway, there's a whole chart and report, and if anybody wants it, I've got it and I can forward it to you. And then let me see, we also had a seashore meeting last week. We had presentations from PSRC. They have a regional transportation dashboard, which has many interactive elements, which you can go look at. We also had a presentation from King County Metro on their Linwood Link work to improve mobility and revise the bus lines to get people to the light rail stations. So this is getting to be, more kind of real now for us all. They're going to refine their proposals through the coming year and present them to King County Council first quarter 2024. So there's a lot of engagement with the community about the different bus lines, and there are some bus lines that are changing in our Lake Forest Park. So I know that Councilmember Goldman has been following this quite carefully, and he can tell you more about that too. So they talked a lot about the fact that a lot of this is revenue neutral, because given the pandemic and everything that's happened, there hasn't been no revenue growth for King County Metro. So everything they're doing has to be revenue neutral. So I'm afraid I kind of challenged them a little bit and said, well, it sounds to me then like the last mile programs are kind of like not happening, right? And so I got, oh, no, we're still working on last mile. So I prodded a little bit there, but they just assured me that they are still concerned about the last mile issues, and for communities like Lake Forest Park and Kenmore and parts of other parts of Shoreline, and they're still working on it. So we haven't seen any real proposals yet, but we hope that will happen. So there'll be a lot of engagement activities going on. They'll probably want to come to the council meeting to talk to us at some point. There's a survey right now that's on the website. It's open until March 10th. And then we had a presentation from them also about their service recovery plan. Weekday boardings are growing. One of the issues that Metro has, though, is that they have a workforce shortage. It's very hard for them to hire bus drivers right now. So that's a real problem. So there's still 345,000 hours of service that have not come back since the pandemic, part of it due to workforce shortages. So they did warn us that they expect that it will be a very different system post-pandemic than it was before. So anyway, so that was that.
Thank you. Councilmember, I'll go Goldman, then Furtani.
I was also at Seashore, but Councilmember Cassover talked about that. I attended the tree board meeting last week. The tree board approved their 2022 report and their 2023 work plans, and they're hoping that they can attend a future council meeting just to present that to the rest of us. Also, there was some comment from the public, concerns about Sound Transit, and the most recent number, it's gone up. It's now slightly over 500 trees that are Sound Transit is proposing to remove. So there's community concern about that. And also making sure that our tree ordinance is able to fully take care of the Sound Transit project. I think what I kind of suggested to the tree board is, since if the council's considering any modifications, it'll probably be happening in a time sensitive way. But if there's a way we can get, once we publish, we have our first touch, if we can get some feedback from the tree board, I think they would appreciate the opportunity to at least provide feedback about any proposed tree code modifications. And that was basically it from the tree board.
Thank you. Councilmember Tiny.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I have two numbers and I'm trying to find the second number here. One of them is 71%. Oh, and the other one is 1181. 71% is the number of percent that we finally finished, by the way, at the Climate Action Committee, figuring out the results of our survey that we sent out. And it turns out that, when you get 71% of people on a survey to agree on anything, that's pretty remarkable. And that was their number one priority for what they want the council to do, is to cooperate with our local cities on climate action plans. And the idea is that they really appreciated seeing coordination in other aspects, for instance, racer and things like that. And they've figured that it might be really good for us to continue that kind of work in the climate arena. The other number was because I went to the K4C Outreach Committee. It's House Bill 1181 / Senate Bill 5203, which is another number. It's the revision of the climate inclusion in the Comprehensive Plan Act, and that's coming up soon. So they're for it, of course. So as am I. So interestingly, there's a really good chance that it will actually pass this year. So just things we need to consider when we look at our comprehensive plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
I've attended 3 meetings. I'll just start with the Healthier Here. They've been watching the legislative session as well as everyone else is, and they're tracking some bills around the sales tax exemptions relating to medical, and then statewide CIE community information exchange allows folks in the medical field to communicate and not stay within their silo. So really increasing the ability for like behavioral health and your medical doctor to know that you've made appointments and that you're not falling through the cracks. The Medicaid MTP waiver, I'm forgetting what the T is, I apologize, has extended the program that is why Healthier Here is here for another year due to COVID. So that was something that we've just now started getting a lot more information on. And then there's some behavioral health workforce bills that are coming through that they're watching, which leads me to the Washington Community Forestry Council. We are also watching a lot of legislative pieces, but more importantly, we're paying attention to the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So those have direct funding for urban forestry, community forestry. In the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a proposal due to them by February 28th by the states so that they can request how much money they want from the pool and what they're going to use it for. And our council, Washington Community Forestry Council suggestions are for obviously additional mapping of the states. We can have a state map of canopy coverage rather than the hit and miss that we have now. So that'll give us some great data to be able to reflect upon, obviously more grants, more staff, but we're also really interested in workforce growth as well. There's a lot of challenges in hiring people within the forestry, urban forestry environment, arborists, tree trimmers, all sorts of pieces of the puzzle there that are hard to get staffed these days. And what's interesting is in talking to some of the other Western states here, they're looking at other things, expanding their nursery stocks. They can plant more trees, more K-12 education, but none of them have talked about workforce development in the same way we have. So I think that kind of puts us in a unique position to lead in that in the region. But luckily we are, going to be looking at getting some funding through those proposals to the feds. And then one of our council members came up with and brought up the latest numbers for housing, kind of talking about our need for access to trees and underserved areas. So current numbers, 900,000 housing units are missing across all AMI bands across Washington state. And so how do we house those people without cutting down all the trees? It's really kind of the conversation on our end. Let's see. And then the last one is as I mentioned, we had the North King County Coalition on Homelessness, the coalition. So in addition to what I mentioned before, the current 5-year plan is sort of frameworked around 7 goals, of which underneath are up to a total of 26 sub-strategies. And then beyond that, there's specific actions that they are taking. And just to give you a sense, they're looking at 24 of these specific actions, of which I forgot to count how many there were, that would be possible, or that would be put into the hands of the subregions to tailor for their specific subregion. So they've kind of internally said, yes, these 24 things are definitely things that will vary across the region. And then they brought 16 to us and said, which of these 16 would you like a hand in, and which do you feel should be more standardized? They're going to take that same question to the other subregions. So we are anticipating the sub-regional planning to button up sometime this year. They asked us to provide feedback on a potential timeline, and we said the faster the better. Let's get boots on the ground. We want to do this. So obviously it depends on how fast they can convene things and all that, but the knock on wood we asked for by the end of the year to have some real movement, focusing on the winter shelter and focusing on youth and young adults. So before they go into the 23-24 school year, that there's some understanding of how the Regional Homelessness Authority will support those folks. So those are the 3 meetings in the last couple weeks.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you. While I did not attend a meeting, I want to comment on Councilmember Goldman's comment regarding the tree board and the 500 trees that Sound Transit is proposing to cut down as part of their work on 522. I worked on a project that I inherited, and that we had to find locations for about 800 or 900 trees. And the city that we were working with had a very difficult time trying to find a location to accommodate 800 and 900 trees. And so I just offer that as a community, and perhaps the tree board might want to think about where trees will be replanted as part of the Sound Transit project might go, because there is going to be a loss of area. And so it's not a function of just planting twice as many trees in half as much area. The tree board might want to consider thinking about what might be an appropriate solution to accommodate the trees that do get planted back as part of this program, because they will invariably propose planting more trees than the trees they took out, because when you initially replant the trees, the canopy is not as large as the mature canopy that was removed. So it is an opportunity to consider getting ahead of that, to think about where we might and how we might address a need within Lake Forest Park that would certainly benefit from consideration now as we plan about it, and not just, oh my gosh, we need to find a place for 1,000 trees. And how do we do it when you think about what the species might be?
I just have a question, and then Councilmember Bodie.
thank
So pretty much overnight, we went to another 100 trees. Where did these 100 trees come from? I'm kind of baffled that. Did the project get bigger in the last 24 hours I didn't know about, or what happened? So I want clarification where these 100 trees are. Because I don't even know where the first 400 are. That's kind of our problem we're having.
And I don't have a great answer, because it is challenging to get that sort of information from Sound Transit. I suspect it's one of those going from 30% design up to 60% design. And as they've actually toured the area, rather than just using satellite maps, they now have a better understanding of what's going on. Alongside the changes they've made, they're shifting the highway a bit to the west, from the lakeside more towards the hillside. And so I think that as they're refining, that's the reason for the increase. Administrator Hill, did you want to add any context to that?
I mean, my understanding has been as they've gone from 30 to 60% and, as they further refine that, I think that number is likely to change again, whether that's up or down, I don't know, but, I think that's the good explanation.
Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, I want to suggest perhaps City Administrator Hill, you could give us a brief update verbally and not on where things are and what you're thinking of with Sound Transit. But on the issue of tree mitigation, I want to say, as someone who's worked in environmental mitigation and done a lot of settlement agreements over the years and been involved in a lot of regulatory processes like that, I do think we should be very cautious against taking money instead of mitigation, because in my experience, and I've seen a lot of these, the money never provides the full mitigation. Even when you estimate it high and you think you're estimating it high, there are complications and issues, and it's way too easy to just have a check written. So I do think that perhaps there will be some component that we won't be able to do, and we might have a fund, but I really want us to caution against not actually getting the mitigation funded. And so the Councilmember Lebo's idea, having the tree board start thinking about that. Personally, I'd like to see still some kind of green corridor along, even if it's skinny trees along plantings along Bothell Way. So I feel, I don't know how much of that is feasible, but I do encourage that we think ahead on that and help our city staff with some options.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, on point, if I may.
Yes, Tom.
Thank you. Just a bit of good news, a very kind Lake Forest Park citizen who's been doing analysis of the 60% design and the commensurate trees that potentially are going to be removed. Turns out that the grove of trees that you've heard me talk about for a number of years, that's directly across from City Hall there, adjacent to the Berkman Trail, the ones that initially in the 30% design looked like they were all going to go, it appears that only one of those maple trees may be removed under the 60% design. So it was very kind of this individual to do the analysis and sent me a quick note and say, hey, I think that maybe this is one place where it might be a less removal than we thought. And I just wanted to say, in terms of what Mr. Lebo said and also what Councilmember Bodie said, I agree. The in lieu fees, I don't think that, I think the caution is well taken here. I really think that that is not a good approach. And I do believe too that there are opportunities for the tree board to consider places that some of these underutilized parcels that the city acquired in the early 90s around the community that are sort of uncelebrated. There's opportunities for additional tree canopy coverage to be put in some of those areas as well. And anyway, all great points that you all have made. Thank you.
Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, I wanted to respond to some of the concerns made by Council Members Bodie, Lebo, and Deputy Mayor French. The tree board has been thinking about that. They are interested in looking at areas around the city. Top priority is to try to maintain as many trees in the 522 corridor, but for additional trees that need to be replanted, look at areas around the city. And from the tree board, they would like to have a particular focus on equity, looking at what parts of the city are currently lacking in tree canopy and using these replacement trees as a way to try to bring those corners of the city up. But it is definitely something that the tree board is mindful of, and they want to make sure that the trees are replanted as much as possible.
Yes, Councilmember Cassover.
Yeah, and just maybe one last comment on trees here. As I've mentioned before, I have been quite concerned over time about the fact that here in Lake Forest Park, we are a second growth forest. The entire city was logged about 100 years ago, a little bit more. And a lot of the maple trees in particular are aging out. And we've seen, a lot of places like Perkins Way, we've had a lot of trees, falling. Well, the native species for this area really are not so many maples. It's really more the conifers, the firs, and I just would think, I know that there are some good forestry people on the tree board and maybe they have some good ideas about how we might change the balance a little bit of some of the trees, particularly in rights of way and city-owned areas to get back to that fir kind of, you know, the stands of Douglas firs rather than a lot of these vine maples and other maples that grew because of the clear cutting all that time ago.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
Sorry to keep it going, but in that same vein, we need tree diversity. I appreciate the going native, but we also need tree diversity. I think we're seeing a lot of through climate impacts, we're seeing a lot of pests moving up into this area that we haven't seen before. The emerald ash borer, and now there's a 5-spine isp beetle. Please don't ask me what any of these are, but I've been told they're invasive and they've been seen in Redmond, I think even out in Bothell. And they are usually taking out a species. So when you have a monoculture of a species, when that pest finally gets here, it takes all of the trees out. So I think the tree board's fully aware of this, I'm sure. So having some feedback from them on policies that will help us ensure that we have a variety of trees in the community, so we're not subject to these sorts of deforestation due to pest impacts, and as well as native species, but also those that will become native if the climate starts changing, as we've been seeing over the last few years. If that becomes the norm, we're going to want to respond to that. So agree wholeheartedly. I think we just need to take it also those next steps.
Good point. I just guess I've just been seeing so many of these maples that look so terrible and falling over. And
There is I think there's a maple fungus or something going around too. There's always something. Okay, I'm done.
The other ones. Okay, seeing none. Good news for you, Larry. They've been working on the tree ordinance for 10 years or 20 years, and they're going to be 20 years on from now. That is an ongoing thing in this city. The tree ordinance is always changing. It's pretty amazing. Couple things, especially for the newer council members. Sound transit's the biggest deal in the world right now, right? I mean, it really is, and we really are concerned, and you guys are doing a great job. You're trying to keep up with stuff. The city, the staff is doing a lot. We really have a lot going on. City Administrator Hill can answer questions, but my point is, I'm just going to make one point. There are 13,000 other people that live in the city of Lake Forest Park. And just, you need to remember, well, we're taking care of this. The staff is still taking care of 13,000 people. You know, while we had our last meeting, there was a lady less than a quarter mile, well, probably less than that, committing suicide during our meeting. That stuff happens all the time, and it happens, there's always something going on. I think there's a rant in the Seattle Times today, and I think it might be about me. I didn't read it because I don't read that stuff, but it's about a street light that hasn't gotten fixed in 2 months. But that's the world, you know, it's just every single part of the city has problems and things, and we still have to take care of them at the same time that we do with the big stuff. So I want to shout out to the staff, because it's overwhelming to try to do with this big stuff, plus take care of everybody else. And you'd be amazed what all the other stuff is, but you know, they do a great job, and Chief is doing a fantastic job. And we're down on some staff in the police department right now, and nobody cares. Nobody worried that they're down on staff. So I just want the council to know that everybody, we are all working together. You guys are doing a great job. Vicky, you're sitting right here, but you got to know that we are trying to do everything we can for you, and we are going to do everything, but we still have to worry about 13,000 other people. That's our job. So we will do the best and everything. And I want you to keep doing, but I just think it's important to remember all the other people out there that we're trying to take care of. So I'm looking forward to what we go ahead of, and the tree ordinance has always been an interesting time. So, but they got something to work on there. I guess, Phil, they'd like you to say a few words, and then we'll get out of here.
Well, and also my request is, are we sharing information with the community? The council members talked about that, trying to make sure that as the staff is getting information, we're sharing it with the community, which spreads the workload around. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I completely appreciate that the police department is down staff and that our staff have a lot to do, as you know.
Thank you.
But this is one that's going to affect the future of
Oh,
our
yeah.
city too,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, so as you've asked before, and some other council members have asked, is that we, create a website like we had for the
Uh-huh.
town center, and that is in the works, and we will
Oh,
get that
thank
up
you.
and running. That'll have links to the 60% drawings, which I think everybody already has links to. It will have links to every meeting where this has been discussed, any correspondence, the letters that have been written by the mayor, the deputy mayor, the motion that was made by the council, and the resulting letter. So all of those links will be there. So the information that you have and that we have, the public will have access to in one repository. As far as an update, we continue to work with Sound Transit and WashDOT on the walls and the landscaping. There's only so much we can do. I want to remind everybody that the walls are the authority of WashDOT, not Sound Transit. So, for a city of our size, we do not ultimately end up owning these walls. We are working on some agreements whereby we can get what we want, but we're going to have to step up as a city to get that. And we continue to work with them. I think in the future, you'll see Kim and Steve bring you amendments to the tree ordinance. And not only is this something that we need as a city, but it's, as Councilmember Lebo pointed out, the corridor won't be able to handle as many trees as are going to need to be planted. And so we're going to have a plan for that. And so that will address how that can happen. And it's not only in our interest, but it's in Sound Transit's interest of how that works for them as well. And so nothing stops. Everybody continues to work on this. We have meetings weekly with Sound Transit to work out the little details that go down to the driveways too steep. And, this driveway now has to be a U driveway. And there are just these minute details that take so much time when you're talking about drainage and landscaping and irrigation and just access points and businesses. And, we've been out walking businesses and meeting with them. And so there's a lot of work yet to be done. I can assure you that it is being done to the best of everybody's ability. And so don't know what else you would like me to say tonight, if there's anything specific you were looking for.
Have they discussed the ravine by Sheridan Market? Because, one of the things I understand is the erosion management structures that are there already have trouble staying in place, and they're proposing to remove more trees in that ravine. So
Yeah,
has there
and
been is that a topic that has come up, or is that for, another day?
I can only speak to the small amount of detail that I get from Paula's email about the fact that they haven't maybe done some soil analysis there that
Uh-huh.
needs to be done. There's going to be some critical area permits that have to be
Right.
acquired from the city. There have been no permits made. I checked with Steve and his staff a couple days ago. The next set of boring permits for soils have not been submitted to the
Okay.
city. So it's a matter of waiting for those so that we can evaluate those. But yeah, they have not been made yet.
So will the website, if permit applications are submitted, will the website include those permit?
Yeah, we're going to
applications?
provide those links because especially those critical areas and a lot of those permits, they're going to have timeframes
Right.
of which those are reviewed. So yes,
Okay.
they will be there as well.
Okay, thank you, Phil. I appreciate it. And I know the staff, there are many issues and the staff are trying to juggle all of them. So I do appreciate that. Yes.
Yep. So, thanks. Has Sound Transit committed to a date for when they'll be having a public meeting in the city?
Last I heard was it was going to be around, well, initially it was going to be at the start of this month, and then I heard by the end of this month. I have heard nothing recently on the exact date of those, so I will have to follow back up on that.
Thanks.
Yes.
Um,
Councilmember Castleberg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. City Administrator Hill, have we had any improvement in the level of information and detail that we're getting from Sound Transit, or do we just still have that 160% drawing that has all the layers on it?
Yes. We are working with Sound Transit to get the documents that we need. We're working to get them the documents that they need. I still do not have the level of detail that I would like to see. And so we're working on that. Basically what Councilmember Cassover is alluding to is these 60% drawings with fully loaded with all the civil on it, make it very difficult, especially for arborists to read and wade through and see what the true impacts are. And for us to be able to make a good assumption on maybe some modifications that could take place. I come from a planning background where, one of the requirements is that you submit a landscaping plan and there's no civil on there. Obviously, it's derived from that civil, but it gets down to where you can actually review that. So that's what we've requested so that we can do a full analysis of exactly what's going on with relationship to landscaping, whether that's trees, shrubs, bushes, small plants, etc.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have one more
Yes,
question.
Councilman Bodie.
Will the city be addressing the fact that the noise evaluation that was done at the earlier stages was quite limited? And we do have city noise ordinances, and there are, noise, at least the noise impacts are coming a lot closer to people's front and doors and backyards. Is there a regulatory piece there or a piece there that the city will be looking at?
I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one because
That's
that's far
fine.
out of my expertise. So
I simply lay that question out because it seems to me that that's one of the questions about the scope of the review that was done and the impacts that are going to occur. So I understand. I'm not asking for an instant answer, and I'm sorry if I put you on the spot. I'm just saying, let's if we can, understand that down the road, that would be helpful.
I can say that one thing I have done without having expertise there, it has been raised and that question has been asked of, there are several residents who have asked that question and I think it is on Sound Transit to at least answer that question and why or why not they would be doing additional work.
And last, will they give us money for reviewing their permits?
So we have an agreement, so they do pay for especially our outside work. So these permits that are coming through, we have an account basically where they have front loaded that is billed against.
Okay.
So, and if we need additional time where we have to have staff spend extra time reviewing things,
Yes,
that's also covered.
thank you. That's helpful. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
No
I'm
problem.
sorry.
I'm fine. It's only 8:20. We got
I
another
know.
2 hours to go. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll adjourn at this time. Thank you, council, very much. Good meeting. Thanks, chief. Thanks, everybody. Thank you too, Jeff. We appreciate it. Have a good night.
He was working with the Redmond.
Yeah.
And the